Is it good to share your location with friends on Whoo? You open Whoo and see your friends' icons scattered across the city, showing who is at a cafe, who is still at school, and who is already on the way home. With just one glance at the map, you can see where everyone is without sending a single "Where are you?" message. For some people, that feels convenient and reassuring, while for others, it feels uncomfortably close to being watched 24 hours a day. In this video, we run a 10-round, 20-turn debate where both sides argue on equal footing about sharing your real-time location with friends on Whoo. Which side are you on? Tell us in the comments. Now, let's get started.
To begin with, I think sharing your location with friends on Whoo can be a very good thing, depending on how you use it. As a Japan-made location sharing app, it is spread mainly among Gen Z. About 10 million downloads in the first 3 months after release and more than 30 million in total by 2025 show that it is actually useful as a tool for meeting up and looking out for each other. Your position appears on the map in real time. There is also a chat function, and that both cuts down on "Where are you now?" messages and increases communication that leads to real-world activities.
But that exact point, that your location is visible in real time, is the problem. Whoo doesn't just share your current location, it also shares how many minutes you have stayed there, the route you took to get there, routes you frequently use, and even your phone's remaining battery level with your friends. In effect, that is like showing your 24-hour activity log to other people, and minor disagreements can easily turn into interrogations like, "Why were you at just a moment ago?" Behind the convenience, you are giving up quite a lot of privacy, and we should not underestimate that.
Even so, Whoo is not designed for showing your location to just anyone. It is basically intended for sharing among a very limited circle of friends, such as family members and close friends. It is not an app that matches you with random strangers whose contact information you don't know, and you can choose the scope of sharing yourself. In the first place, when it is only close people, many of those relationships already involve telling each other about destinations and plans. You could say it's simply a tool that visualizes that on a map and reduces the cost to check in.
In reality, however, it is precisely because the other person is close that power dynamics arise that make it hard to refuse. On Q&A sites, there are multiple posts from people whose partners strongly demand that they install Whoo, saying they hate feeling monitored, but if they refuse, they are suspected of cheating. Outwardly, it is for peace of mind or to reduce messaging, but in practice, it sometimes becomes an excuse to constantly check the other person's behavior. Something that looks like consent easily becomes practically coerced because of pressure from the relationship.
In response to those concerns, the Whoo team has prepared quite detailed privacy settings. There is Ghost Mode, which completely hides your location, Freeze, which pins your location in one place, and Fuzzy Mode, which makes your location approximate. With those, you can lower your visibility only when you don't want to be seen right now. You can control to some extent the activities you don't want to show, such as unplanned detours or time alone. So I see it less as a 24-hour surveillance app and more as a map-based chat you can switch on and off yourself.
But that very ghost mode and freeze feature can also become seeds of conflict in relationships. It easily triggers suspicions like, "Your location was visible just a minute ago. Why did you suddenly go ghost?" And the mere existence of such functions can itself become a new tool for control. Technically, you can turn it off, but in reality, there are always some friends, partners, or family members who do not allow the freedom to turn it off. So you cannot say that just having settings automatically makes it safe.
On the other hand, from a guardian's perspective, the benefits are concrete. Parents can check their child's commuting route or a late-night return home without making them send messages every time. And because they can see battery levels, they can somewhat prepare for situations where the battery dies and we can't reach them. For many families, it becomes a realistic solution that reduces stress on both sides and the cost of keeping an eye on children compared to calling every single time a reply is slow.
But you cannot ignore the impact of practically reducing a growing child's time when no one is watching them and secret personal territory to almost zero in exchange for safety. Even if it is introduced for family monitoring, there are concerns that it ends up being used as a tool of control, for example, a domestic abuser using it to track their partner, and that the sharing cannot be turned off even when the child becomes a university student or an adult. Once constant location sharing becomes normal, the psychological hurdle to turning it off becomes very high.
Location sharing is also effective in the context of disasters or accidents. When trains are stopped by an earthquake or heavy rain, even if messages are hard to deliver, as long as you can see your family's or friends' locations you can figure out roughly when they might get home and where they are sheltering. If contact suddenly cuts off, you can estimate their movements from the last visible location, and that can help with safety checks or searches compared to having literally no clues at all.
But there is a question of whether it is appropriate to hand over your behavioral log all the time in everyday life in exchange for that kind of abstract benefit. It might help in an emergency. Even if no major data leaks from Who have been reported yet, due to the nature of location data, once it leaks from the server or a device, your home, school route, and daily patterns are all exposed. It feels like everyday privacy is being treated too cheaply under the slogan of just in case.
On the mental side, there are many situations where location sharing actually becomes a source of reassurance. If you can see on the map that the other person is moving, even when replies are late, your fear that they are ignoring me decreases, which prevents conflicts where you blame them or blame yourself. Even among friends, if you can see they're still at their part-time job, that's why they can't reply, you can avoid unnecessary speculation. In relationships where replying has effectively become an obligation, location sharing can in fact reduce the psychological burden.
Conversely, though, the constant awareness that someone is always watching becomes a source of stress that unconsciously restricts behavior. Every time you make a detour, you start thinking, how will this look? And because the map automatically explains who you are with and where, it becomes harder to freely experiment or act in gray areas. Especially among teenagers, there is strong peer pressure, like, we're all sharing our locations. Why are you the only one going ghost? And instead of providing reassurance, it can increase anxiety and guilt.
Even so, among location sharing apps, Who deliberately puts fun and a sense of excitement at the forefront and tries to soften the image of a stalker-like surveillance tool. The colorful design, stickers, and online-offline indicators all function as triggers for positive actions like, I'm here now, let's hang out, rather than mere monitoring. I think there is considerable value in it as an app that increases map-based relationships where you can actually go meet each other instead of just text exchanges on social media.
But that very fun vibe is also part of what lowers the barrier to surveillance. Behind the colorful and pop UI and stickers, what it is doing is still constant sharing of location. You could say it just wraps watching over you in a soft package. If young people install it without thinking deeply because everyone is using it, and a situation develops where if you stop using it, you're left out, then it becomes a powerful mechanism to make people voluntarily accept surveillance. It is dangerous if you let yourself be swept away by the atmosphere without looking at what the functions actually do.
Of course, if you add just anyone as a friend or use it for meeting strangers, that is a problem. But that is a risk common to any social network, not only Who. The app itself warns users not to share location data with people they do not know, and not to put personal information such as face photos or school names in their profiles. In other words, if you limit it to a small circle of people you really trust and keep your profile information minimal, you can keep the risks quite low while still realistically enjoying the benefits for meeting up and watching over each other.
However, in actual use, it often does not stay within that small circle you can really trust. If you add everyone in the class, everyone in the club, everyone at work, because why not add them all for now? Then in that group, there will inevitably be people you fall out with or people you would like to keep at a distance. Once you start sharing your location, it becomes very hard to remove just one particular person. And the gap between what you have shown in the past and what you will show from now on can itself become a new source of trouble.
That is exactly why I think the important thing is talking beforehand about how much you want to show before installing it. If you explicitly agree in advance on who you'll be friends with, how you will treat the timing of ghost mode, and how much you will ignore location history, then it can be a tool based on shared rules rather than a simple surveillance device. Who is not an inherently dangerous app, and its settings are relatively easy to understand. So for people who can decide how to use it on their own, it can become a way to turn location sharing into a positive experience.
The question, though, is how many people can really set the rules themselves? Especially teenagers and young adults who feel insecure about their romantic relationships tend to act based on emotions like they might hate me if I refuse, rather than on cool-headed rulemaking. The moment someone says, let's install it for peace of mind, the rules become an afterthought, and an atmosphere forms where it is hard to say no to location sharing. As a tool, it may be neutral, but once placed inside real-world power relationships, I think sharing your location with friends on Who has a structure that easily deprives the weaker side of their options.
Overall, I think sharing your location with friends on Who is a good thing if certain conditions are met. A small circle of trusted people, relationships where you can discuss rules in advance, and consent based on an understanding of how it works. In fact, many users are using it for meeting up, watching over each other, and spontaneously joining friends. And given how widely it is spread in numbers, those benefits clearly exist. Rather than branding location sharing as evil across the board, I want to say that for people who can choose with whom and within what scope they share, the positives outweigh the negatives.
On the other hand, taking into account modern human relationships and power structures, I think that sharing your location with friends on Who does more harm than good for the average user. Even if the technical security level is high, if location sharing that you cannot really refuse spreads because of emotional and social pressure, a society where someone is always watching you becomes the norm. The convenience can be replaced to some extent by other means, but once people's sense of privacy and personal boundaries is eroded, it is hard to restore. That is why I end this debate from the position that this cannot be called a good thing.
This concludes our 10-round debate on whether it is good to share your location with friends on Who. Where do you draw the line between convenient peace of mind and feeling like you are being constantly monitored? Share your own thoughts and experiences with Who or other location sharing apps in the comments.